So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the IWFM People Management event. We'll be discussing mental health this afternoon and where the responsibility for mental health actually lies. I am CJ Green and I'm co-founder of Brave Goose and co-creator of Clever Goose, which is a software that skills managers to deal with people and HR issues, the nitty-gritty gnarly stuff. I am joined by an extraordinary panel. You're incredibly lucky this afternoon, and I will hand them to do a brief whistle-stop tour. So Rachel, over to you.
Thank you, CJ. My name is Rachel Jackson, and I run a consultancy called Changing Dialogues. And I work as a consultant, a coach, a facilitator in fields as broad as resilience, emotional intelligence, leadership, organisational development, all of those difficult questions I really enjoy getting involved in.
Thank you, Rachel. Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen Farrell. I am the facilities manager for Turner and Townsend, but I'm also a qualified mindfulness coach. And I became a mindfulness coach earlier in the year because I am passionate about bringing mindfulness to the modern age. I think there are a lot of people who are still very wary when they hear the word mindfulness or meditation. So I'm all about kind of breaking down the stigma, demonstrating to people the positive impact that it can have on their life. It's not all about sitting around a campfire singing kumbaya and wearing beads around your neck. It's actually a way of mentally training your mind to be more engaged, more focused, and more in the moment.
Wonderful, thanks, Karen. I love a bit of kumbaya. Tom.
I'm Tom. I run Bamboo Mental Health. I review organisations and how they support people on mental health, and I train people.
Wonderful, thanks, Tom. Julie?
Hi, excuse me. I'm Julie. I'm a staff happiness strategist. So what I basically do is help businesses to align their learning and development strategy with their business objectives. So that involves everything to do with your people. So right from the moment that they walk through the door to the moment that they leave. So all your recruitment, your development, everything I help businesses with, and basically creating that happy workplace.
Wonderful. Gosh, that's a big role, Julie. Thank you. Thank you all. So it's estimated that about 4 adults experience at least one mental health problem in any given year. And early signs of poor mental health, including that kind of, feeling really anxious, stressed, having low moods, trouble sleeping, and it can affect everyone. But mental health and well-being are not only for kind of the individual, it only affects the individual and their ability to thrive, but it's also their ability to enjoy work, and it's vital for the prosperity and productivity of their organisation. We have seen in the pandemic an absolute surge in kind of isolation, remote working, feeling lonely, all of that kind of really tough stuff that we've all been through, and we've all been through it in very different ways. We're dealing with homeschooling, and the panel before you all came on were just talking about, gosh, we're almost grateful when someone else visually online has to be dealing with the stuff that we deal with, because it makes us feel a bit better about kind of how stressful in the moment that stuff is for us. And we talk about the challenge at the moment, I think actually, is we talk about how tough this stuff is a lot of the time, and almost sometimes we cement it feeling even tougher because the only conversations we have is about how tough it is. But also I think it's important to recognise there has been some really nice things that have come out of what we've all been through. We've spent the days in the last couple of days in Brave Goose with a client where people were talking about, I never imagined having a work-life balance that I now can envision in my future. I have spent more time with my family than I ever thought could be possible whilst balancing it with work. And that's extraordinarily positive. So, whilst we're looking at all the stuff that's been really challenging and difficult in terms of mental health, we also need to recognise there has been some really good things that have come out of it, even though we're finding that kind of difference and change really challenging. But when it comes to mental health, I think sometimes we aren't always sure about where does responsibility lie for making this stuff okay. So does it lie with organizations? Does it lie with teams? Is it up to a manager to make sure mental health is okay? Or is it with all of us ourselves? So the reason this extraordinary panel is here today, and Rachel has the largest coffee cup I've ever seen in the world, is to discuss with you those kind of questions around, you know, who does it belong to? What should we be doing? What should we be thinking about when it comes to mental health? So as with all wonderful webinars, we're not going to do all the hard work. We've got some hard work for you as well. So we've got a poll question that we'd like to give you in order for you to tell us what you're thinking. So the first of our poll questions is, how much of a negative impact has the pandemic and lockdown had on your own well-being and mental health? So if you'd like to give that a whirl now. Okay, wonderful. So we've got our results come through. Okay, so negative impact, kind of moderate, little, and some people are feeling like it's been substantial. 7% are saying it's no impact. So for the majority of people on this call, there's been a little impact in terms of negative impact on us. And 19% of you are saying kind of the impact on your mental health has been substantial. So that's fascinating. If we can drop our kind of slides for a moment, so back to our panel. So that's an interesting kind of reflection on how people are feeling. Rachel, is that surprising?
I don't think it's hugely surprising, and I think it's nice to see that almost the big space in the middle that says little to moderate. If you think about the journey that we've been on, I suspect if we'd have looked at that those results back in April or June, they may have seen a little bit more of an impact. But I think it comes down to the diverse experience that people are having. And you kind of naturally assume that everybody's going through something vaguely similar to what you're going through. And having spoken to lots of people as we've been going through client work, there are people who are sitting in a flat on their own. There are people who are actually really enjoying spending more time with their family. There are people who have had a baby in this period. So there seems to be a real huge diversity in that experience. So I don't suppose I'm hugely surprised by the fact that that's still in that kind of moderate space, because I think it's gone both ways for many people.
Brilliant, thank you. And Tom, do you think the fact that we've got used to this is kind of why there might be people feeling like less kind of extreme substantial stress by the situation?
And actually, this data, which has most people mostly in the middle, is a classic bell curve. We kind of expect that. I think that it depends what type of person you are. If, for example, you are in health and safety or HR, then maybe you are one of the meerkats that are a bit more alert than the others, you know, in the organization. It's going to be on radar. We get stimulated when the news comes in early. And by now, we've wrapped our heads around it and we've got things in place. So we don't require that same kind of stimulation. But what we do know is that, you know, in mid-lockdown in April, about 50% of people were saying they're experiencing low mood, depression-like symptoms. And I saw a company data yesterday where up to 75 people were still experiencing depression-like symptoms or stress or anxiety, some kind of poor mental health, but the reasons for those were different. So we are we are seeing a good amount of people still involved in this, and still feeling this stuff, but sometimes the reasons for those have changed. As an organisation, we really ought to turn our attention to that sort of 19% or so. We're really struggling, to get by. It's one thing feeling this stuff, it's another thing as if it actually gets in the way of us functioning properly in that country.
Yeah, and I think, Tom, you kind of hit on a point that is just so alive and valid for everyone right now, is that the breadth of everyone's experiences being so different is like 90% of the challenge, isn't it? Is that actually, how do you support people when we can't even get close to what they're experiencing because we're not in it there with them? Great stuff, thanks. Karen, do you, when you kind of think about this, do you have any kind of really nice tips and tricks for people who are thinking personally about taking control of mental health?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because obviously I was on maternity leave initially, and then lockdown happened, and I think I'd sort of had, I guess, I'd been at home on my own, seeing the same four walls every day, very little social contact, feeling a bit maybe trapped. So I sort of came up, I guess, with strategies to cope. And then it was really interesting when lockdown happened, everyone was kind of feeling the same. Sort of, I felt like they couldn't socialize, they couldn't go out, they were stuck indoors all day. So it was really interesting when I was able to share some of sort of my tips that, I did that actually helped me. Now, it's really interesting, I guess, feeling stuck can really affect your mental health, being indoors, feeling like you can't get out, feeling trapped. So the best way to feel, I guess, unstuck is to do something outside your comfort zone and do something that's going to help you kind of grow and develop, never stop, growing. And the great thing about the virtual world is you can do that. You can join choirs, running clubs, you can go to the theatre's gone online, yoga's gone online. Like it's, there's so many things online that you can do. I did a candle making workshop a couple of days ago, mainly because I could. It was something different to do, and actually just then talking to people about what I'd done made me happy. So I think it's definitely, taking advantage of, the virtual world and actually embracing it and doing something different. Another thing is acknowledging how you're feeling. I think so many people feel like they have to feel happy or they have to be in a good mood all the time. But actually, if you're not feeling happy and you're not in a good mood, just acknowledge that and actually allow yourself, 5 minutes or so to feel depressed or anxious or stressed. And then after that 5 minutes, kind of move on and do something, different and kind of, I guess, go into another room or change your activity, and that kind of mental and physical shift will then sort of snap you out of automatic pilot and actually help you to sort of positively change your mindset. Another thing is, try not to be, and this is something that I would say to my friends, try not to be, goal orientated. By all means, set yourselves goals and have a clear vision, but don't tie your happiness to that. So many people are like, I'll only be happy once lockdown's over, or only be happy when I go back to work. And actually, by doing that, you're taking the power of your future happiness and placing it on something completely outside of your control. So you really need to be happy with what you've already got. And I guess that's where sort of gratitude comes in. And I think, being grateful for, the little things, the fact that actually you can go for a walk at lunchtime, you don't have to do the commute, just things like that. They're things that have sort of helped me, and things that I've sort of passed on to people, and I think it's had a positive effect on them as well.
Fantastic, thank you, Karen. And I think one of the things that really resonated with me as you were talking is, gosh, how many of us tie our happiness to something where it's like, I'm going to make sure I do this every day this week, and the minute you don't do it on day 2, it's like the whole week is written off suddenly in terms of kind of your ability to cope with the rest of what's coming at you. Julie, you are well rooted around happiness. What things can people be thinking about, in addition to what Karen's talked about, to make sure that kind of being resilient and able to cope is there for them during this time?
I think you sort of touched on it there. You sort of, I don't know if everybody does this, but you put pressure on yourself. You're working from home, you're trying to homeschool, you're trying to do 9 to 5, you can see the housework that needs to be done. You put that much pressure on yourself, and I think that can lead to the burnout. So, and I think this is where it comes down to that communication and managers knowing their teams, so that them channels are open, so that you can reach out, and if you are struggling, let your employers know, let your managers know, because the support's there. And I think it's maybe a human thing, but we're all proud. We don't want to ask for that help. And you see so many people sort of talking about, once they've asked for help, once they've asked for that support or reached out, it's a massive weight just taken off the shoulders. So just touching what Karen said, I think it's taking that pressure off yourself and only doing what you physically can do and not trying to stretch yourself too far.
And I think it's, you're completely, Julie, it's about having the courage to say, do you know what, in my world, I'm not 100% perfect all the time. Right now, it's not going that well. I'm having a bit of a blip. But you know, that isn't kind of my reality all of the time. I'm blipping right now, but I can move on, and tomorrow's another day. It's kind of being okay with that. And as I say, that relief when you know that other people are experiencing something similar to yourself. So sharing people's stories is so powerful, isn't it? So, and coming on to that, a lot of what people have been feeling during pandemic, lockdown, virtual working has been very connected with isolation, and how people have felt whilst we're present, probably online a lot of the time, or maybe not if our circumstances have been, we're in furlough and actually we're just very much in our kind of home bubble. But isolation is the prevalent theme. Tom, kind of, can you talk to us about what isolation means for people's mental well-being?
Yeah, I'll rewind you a little bit. As an experiment done in the 1970s in Chicago by the university there. And if you were involved in the experiment, you were given a test tube and you had a heart rate monitor, and you had to write down what was happening in your world at different random points during the day. And you would spit in the test tube to measure the cortisol, the stress hormone in your saliva. And the researchers discovered that physiologically, the feelings of chronic loneliness and isolation were as stressful to the human condition as being attacked in the street by a stranger. So we need to unpack our definition of stress. I think commonly an overwhelm feels like it's either a single event or a major event, but it can be a much more subtle effect on us. It can be layered. And you could certainly be lonely in a house full of people or in a room full of people. And so those feelings occur. We either feel left out, not part of things, just cut off, or unmotivated. And we enter into, it's still a stress response, it just comes out differently. So that can happen. Of course, when you choose to go off on your own, and when you choose isolation, it can be a very positive thing. So again, we must reflect on this as a spectrum of experience, and everybody from time to time is going to move along that spectrum. Asking me how I am this morning, you'll get a different answer tomorrow morning or tomorrow evening. And so we have to kind of work with that changing set of circumstances.
Completely, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's kind of when people say, you know, how's this experience going for you? You think, I don't know, because Monday was very different to Wednesday for me. So absolutely.
Yeah.
In terms of that isolation aspect, Julie, do you kind of have any thoughts about what people might be able to actually do to help? Because we're sort of present with everyone, but not connecting in the same way.
Yeah, I think some people prefer that working from home, and you know, they're quite happy to get their head down and work away, whereas others want that social interaction. So I think it comes down to knowing everybody's preference, because you've got some that don't want to be constantly sort of having the team meetings and, you know, the chats and the coffee. They just want to get their head down, get the work done, whereas the others, they just want to have, you know, maybe a quick chat so it again comes down to that communication and just sort of knowing everybody's preference.
Yeah, completely. And I think you make a very good point that actually probably all the extroverts at the beginning of our first lockdown went into turbo quizzes and, you know, the social interactions where we put funny hats on and kind of had those experiences. But actually, for some of the more introverted characters, they were like, great, I have the ability to get on with my work day in a way that really works for me. So I think the one thing that the pandemic has done for us is brought brought into kind of sharp focus that everybody is so different, and there isn't everyone needs to be kind of treated the same way when we're trying to engage and interact with people. So in terms of kind of being online quite a lot and being in this constant online presence, that there's some burnout happening where people are feeling like there's no gaps in their day anymore. Rachel, is there anything organisations can do that will help with that? I've got to be present all the time. Presenteeism has taken on a new role and it's in my home now. What can organisations do to help that?
I think a lot of the things that we've been talking about so far in terms of getting to know your people is really, really important, because the workplace is somewhere, when we all go into a physical workplace, we meet quite a lot of the motivational requirements that each person has. So if you're motivated by getting results, you get feedback constantly in the workplace. If you're motivated by being part of something, then you've got people around you that you can work with and connect with. If you're motivated by having an impact and influencing and making things change, you can see that impact happening. And a lot of people, I believe, have lost that sense of self, that sense of connection to their motivation, which is something that when we're in the workplace, we coach leaders on how to tap into people's motivation. Now that people are working from home, that motivation is much more blurred, and I think it's much more difficult for people to separate their work motivation from their home motivation, and they're getting mixed up. I'm used to working in an environment here where I work and then I do other stuff in the house. I went downstairs earlier to have a cup of tea and a break from work, and my husband's sitting in the kitchen working. So that ability to switch off, I think, is really, really difficult for people. And I think the more people in organisations can understand what's happening in the individual houses of the people that they're supporting, the more they're able to recognise the individual needs of the people there. But I do think there's something particularly important when we're all online, of giving people overt formal permission to be offline. I spoke with a client the other day who was basically saying that their system, their literal working system, the technology that they're using, logs on the moment somebody turns on their laptop and doesn't log off until that laptop's turned off. So they are continually visible. They are continually visible either facially or in terms of what they're doing on their keyboard or how often they're clicked on something. And I don't think we can survive that. It focuses on continual productivity. We are continually focused on how productive are you in this moment. And in the workplace, we'd stop, we'd have a cup of tea, we'd wander around outside, we'd go and get a sandwich, we'd have downtime. And I think we're struggling to understand how to have downtime in a virtual environment. We just don't know how to do it.
I think that you made a kind of really wonderful point now, just there, about actually, and we've talked throughout this call so far about, it's about people understanding the individual, but actually it goes further than that now, doesn't it? And as you've said, Rachel, it's not about the individual, it's about understand your individual, but understand their home as well. So what's their wider context in their personal life, which is perhaps a level of engagement with our people that we've never had to have before. I've got a wonderful question that's come through, which is absolutely to this point, is how do we normalize flexible times? So some people like to do their emails in the evenings, some people like to do them first thing in the morning. It kind of depends what's happening in your family life. Some of us switch off at some point, but then feel stressed when someone else has picked up the workflow for that day and it's now bombarding us in our evening when it's our downtime. That's all the tough stuff. Karen, is there some things that we can do to try and put some parameters around that?
Yeah, and it is really hard because obviously when you go to work and when you leave work, it's very definitive. But when you're at home, there's definitely, it is blurred. So something that I used to do when we were back in the office was I would have like a me day Monday, and I would literally 5 o'clock I would switch off my computer, I'd go to a yoga class, I'd go to a choir, and it gave me a higher purpose. It gave me a reason to switch off my laptop and actually forget about work and do something that was all about me. And I think this is the problem, that people are I guess, forgetting about themselves, and they're just working, and it's, you know, they're becoming sort of 12-hour days, and life and work is really blurred. So I think, yes, you just need to be really strict with yourself, I guess, which is easier said than done. But definitely, you know, just keep that in mind. Give yourself a purpose to actually switch your computer off at 5 o'clock and do something for you. Otherwise, yeah, it just becomes a blur, and then can become a downward spiral.
Yeah, and we kind of give ourselves an excuse, don't we? We're like, oh, actually, I could do that for myself, but there's all of this going on. But it's almost, we all need to learn a new sort of discipline around our own mental health and well-being, don't we now? Which is kind of, it's an extension of what we should have been thinking about when we were in the workplace, but workplace gave us some boundaries that was useful, perhaps.
Exactly, because I think in the past, you know, working from home, you know, when you would work from home and everything, it was great, because that would be the day that you'd be working, but you'd probably also do a bit of washing, and things like that. It was a bit more of a relaxed day. But now when you're working from home all the time, yeah, you really have to be disciplined. Otherwise, yeah, it can be a really tough, you know, experience.
Perfect. So I'd like to push over to our audience again and get them to do a bit more work. So we've got another poll that we'd like to ask about furlough and redundancy in particular. So hopefully that will be kind of popping up on your screen. I think that's our last question, so we probably need to go to the next one now.
Hi CJ, this is the second one I've got, which was how much of a positive impact is it on mum?
We would like to have, if you have been furloughed, it's a question around being furloughed, are you worried about it, etc. Thank you. So this is a kind of a question so we can just kind of understand who we've got in terms of the audience. Have you been furloughed since the pandemic has started for us? Okay, gosh, we've got a large proportion of you on this call not being furloughed. I wonder if that's because this is the people management special interest group webinar for WIFM, IWFM, sorry. I suspect if you're people manager people, you've probably been extraordinarily busy over the course of the pandemic. So we've got a secondary awkward silence poll for you to engage with now. And so we've got some questions around if you have, how do you feel about furlough? And if not, kind of what's your response to that? So give that a whirl. Okay, so panel, if you can just have a kind of think about those results that we've got coming through here. We've got sort of equal proportions of people worrying about the job or relationship with colleagues, suffering at work. and furlough being a positive experience for some. And actually, I'm kind of, optimistic and feel grateful that we've got some people feeling positive about the experience, and people who've lost confidence potentially because of some of the isolation situation we've just been talking about. But if we can lose our results screen now and go back to our wonderful and beautiful panel. So in terms of the furlough experience and what people may have been going through, and also, that kind of threat of potential job losses coming in the future, what people might be kind of looking to cope with in the coming, the next 12 months. How can people, and I'll ask Julie actually, how can people make sure they can dig into inner happy, and what can we do for ourselves when we know we might be facing something tough coming up?
You mean for ourselves or within the business as an employee?
Both, actually, would be really handy.
So it's quite surprising actually to see that, well, not surprising that a lot of people had a positive impact. I suppose when you see, everyone's been able to do the garden and the decorating that's been sat there for months or even years. So I can see maybe how that's had a positive impact, that maybe, all them little jobs that have been niggling and people have finally got round to do it. So, there could be some, and I mean, Karen might be able to tell us a bit more about that, with just being able to do your own work and do them hobbies and things that you've always wanted to do. I think when you're working from home as well, you want to be creating the right environment. You want to have that happy workplace. And I know I talk about creating the happy workplace in a business. And I think that's a lot around the culture. So it's making sure that you've got that's a happy workplace in working at home and in your environment. And I think going forward, when are we going to get back to any normality? But I suppose when we can get back into the office, it's looking at the culture, and are we in the same position as what we were months ago, and do we need to, is now the time to maybe have a look at everything that we're doing and as a company and the culture, and have a look at how we are treating our staff and what we can be doing to go forward, and and develop our people and show that we're invested in, committed in keeping them.
Yeah, and as we say, it's kind of that sort of, now's the moment for reimagining the way we work, isn't it? It's kind of,
I think it's a great time to be reevaluating the workplace culture, the values, everything really.
Yeah, and I think probably I err on the side of cautious optimism with a lot of discussions that I have, where I'm hopeful that actually this has been the spring forward to reimagine the way that we work, to give people a bit more balance. Perfect, thank you, Julie. Tom, over to kind of pick your brains a little bit about kind of, those people that are facing that tough stuff, potentially, kind of, what could they be doing to kind of make themselves a bit more resilient about that?
Well, I think first of all, Rachel mentioned this earlier on, calling it and labeling it and understanding that this might be your first time in this bit, the fucking first time, as Brené Brown calls it, a swart, and it's important that we understand that it's extremely difficult. Uncertainty draws attention to itself, and we can sometimes get really lost up in that. But to call it, to label it, to acknowledge where you are is the first part of it, I think. Then if you look at either a crisis or a trauma, personal or organizational, you can see the kind of sort of classic curve response. We get excited, and then we kind of, we get stimulated, we get all heroic about it, and then we kind of plunge down into the difficult part of it. As we come out of it, as we crawl out of it, that's the moment for us to acknowledge, do I want to do the same as I did before, which is probably something that is not available to me, and that can be really stressful to try and chase something that's not available, or do I want to adapt? Do I want to change? What could the future look like? Ask yourself things like, how good could this be? Even if it's furlough, even if it's redundancy, if it's a change of job, even if it's unexpected, to enter yourself into that world of exploration of, okay, the past is gone, that's not available to me. What could this look like? Is this a chance for me Is this the blank sheet of paper that I actually always dreamed about, and now it's come? So there are ways of doing that. What I would also say is that the positive psychology will only get you so far. Okay, you may be having a really difficult time of it, and sometimes therapeutic support can be really valuable during these times.
Yeah, I completely agree, Tom. And sometimes it's that, sometimes kind of let's look at the positives, let's kind of move forward is really helpful. Sometimes acknowledging you feel just, particularly in virtual environments, we do a lot of projecting positives, don't we? Which is tough for some people.
Yeah, you might well be on a positive trajectory on the change curve, but it's very difficult to see that when your world feels like it's crashing down. And so it's sometimes only reflecting back where we can go, oh, that's where I was, and the trajectory is really good. But it is, I'm sure Rachel's worked with a lot of people on this kind of coaching.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what you were saying, Tom, because I think an awful lot of what you're saying at an individual level is also true at an organisational level. I think there are big moments organisationally to stop and think, is this what we want to be doing? Is this who we want to be? And I think moving forward, one of the biggest things that organisations will benefit from is finding that sense of meaning, that sense of purpose, and redefining that internally. And I think that's an individual journey, but I think it's also a shared journey. And some of the most wonderful things that I've done recently have been about allowing people to share their story and form a new organisational story, because I think moving forward it's going to be those narratives that create clarity and that create movement forward. I think what's happened in 2020 has been we've lost a lot of those threads. They've either got broken or they've got delayed or they've got diverted in some way. And actually enabling your people to come together and find that organisational thread once more that they can connect and find meaning in, I think is really important. But as you say, at an individual level, I've spoken to a number of people who have been made redundant, and one of the first things that I say to them is take a moment to feel this, to really feel it and to know what it means, and don't rush to try and find the way out of it. You have to kind of acknowledge where you are, and I think that's true both individually and organisationally.
I think that's incredibly powerful, and you know, to Tom's point and yours, Rachel, you know, there is, faced with the tough stuff, we want to go into hero, I'm going to fix it mode, and actually sometimes a pause is far more powerful. Absolutely. Karen, I'm interested in kind of the polls that we've had here on this webinar today. Sorry about my dog. And also about the fact that I've been on a lot of kind of webinars and calls where the questions that we ask and the media that we're bombarded with is all of, this has been so terrible for everybody, hasn't it? And like, let's all agree that this has been awful. I think we all acknowledge it's been weird and strange and unusual, and we probably will be quite happy to see the back of 2020. Do you think the fact that we're slightly isolated as individuals, but also we're bombarded with the negative message, is part of what's playing into how people are feeling at the moment? And how can we combat that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there have been some real positives that have come out of this, and I think it is adopting that kind of that positive mindset and kind of accepting the situation, but rather than going into a downward spiral, actually putting in some positive steps to sort of embrace it. So yeah, I guess, I mean, everyone's really individual, like we were saying. It's been, you know, it's been a sort of an individual experience to everyone. But I think, you know, it's just acknowledging that this is a period of time, accepting it, and it will come to an end at some point. You know, it might be different, but you know, this is just a moment in time that you know, people just have to accept. And then, you know, it will, you know, things change and things will, you know, it will come to an end eventually, or some things, you know, will become positive. So it's just really, I guess, just accepting the here and now, and then, you know, moving forward in a positive way.
It's funny because I came across something that was specifically around people that suffer with depression, and the article that I read, what specifically said, the most powerful thing for people to know when they're going through the toughest of days is that it will pass, and that for the majority of people, you come out of the other side of it, and that was a powerful message for people to really land, that this is not it, and this is not where you're going to be forever. This is your moment, which is exactly what you were talking to us about there, Karen. Thank you. If I can switch to another awkward silence poll, that would be awesome. I would get Rachel to sing, but you know, she might not like that.
You might not like that.
So the poll that I would like now would be how you would describe your current employment situation.
I think as a group, CJ, we ought to be able to do that sha-la-la-la background music.
Singing hold music by the panel. That would be new.
Yeah.
Like the elevator music.
Exactly that. So if I can switch to the poll question that is, how would you describe your current employment situation?
So apologies, CJ, we don't actually have a poll for that one, but audience members, if you do want to put some comments in the questions box, you can send that directly through to CJ. So how would you...
Even more handy. Thank you very much.
No worries. So audience members, if you go into your questions box and if you want to send through your answers for how you currently describe your current employment situation, CJ will be able to see those live.
Perfect. So I will give you some options. Are you actively looking for employment? Are you open to opportunities? Not looking right now? Or none of the above? So it's about where you are. And I mean, you don't have to actually text what I've just said, but are you in employment and comfortable? Or are you looking? What's going on for you guys right now? And you know, it will be more awkward for you to watch if no one puts anything in chat, just so you know.
DJ, can I build on that technology question while we're waiting for the poll stuff to come in?
Perfect. Thank you.
We were talking about all of the negative press and all of the negativity that we're bombarded with. I think one of the things that I found really interesting in this space is because we are all online and because we are all digitally enabled, or more digitally enabled than we were, I've spoken to many people who are digitally overwhelmed. So there are so many data points coming at them that they don't know how to switch off them. And one of the most difficult ones is the social media one, because we've been watching all kinds of documentaries about how you tend to get what you're looking for. So if you're looking for, is everything okay? Then you get a whole load of messages about, oh, these are the things that might not be okay. If you're looking for redundancies, you get a whole load of messages about where redundancies are. And I'm not sure that people are as aware of that as they could be. So they tend to end up self-feeding more negativity. And it's a really difficult one to help people find those boundaries.
That's really helpful, Rachel. Do you know what? So you get that kind of confirmation bias, don't you? But then you get the kind of the analytics bias on your search stuff, and you don't know that is happening. But what we do know is from Tedeschi and Calhoun, some research from a while ago, late 90s, is that 60% of people can experience post-traumatic growth as well as post-traumatic, rather than post-traumatic stress from a really challenging and difficult situation. But it requires that the conversations with the individual or the facilitation for the organization has to be actively managed. It doesn't just happen naturally. But post-traumatic growth is available when we turn our attention to it, when we employ people like Rachel and Julie to help us kind of, to manage that journey for the organization, for the individuals within it.
And kind of that is probably probably one of the points in terms of overwhelming nature of what we've been through, that is kind of absolutely there for everyone. And that ability, we've all ceased to have ability to turn off, haven't we? And so I'm just going to go to, I can't see your questions, but we've got some really wonderfully capable individuals in the background that can. Have we got anything coming through that we can pay attention to?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll read a few out. So from Swati, they've said about working on flexi furlough at the moment. Rebecca's got a new job. She's 5 months in, so well done, Rebecca. Hope that's all going okay.
Nice one, Rebecca.
Unfortunately for David, he said it's not looking very happy where he is, so hopefully it gets a bit better for him. Chandra is in employment comfortably, which is good. Dan is currently employed, but he's always looking for new opportunities, which is a good mindset to have.
So for those people on kind of flexi furlough is a classic sort of perhaps feeling quite unsure about how everything is going to evolve. Is there a way, Karen, that people can get comfortable with, actually, I'm not quite sure where I'm at right now?
Yeah, furlough is an interesting one, because I think some staff might feel like they are less of an employee. They might feel that they've been disconnected from their employer, from their colleagues. So I think, I guess sort of from a sort of a mindfulness perspective, things that people can do is actually just, again, going back to sort of just focusing on the here and now and the present moment. So much of our mind, it wanders into the past, it wanders into the future, and when it goes into the past, we ruminate. When we ruminate, we analyze or obsess over life situations, and when it goes into the future, we think about worst case scenarios. And I guess if you are on furlough and maybe feeling a bit concerned, and it's just acknowledging these wandering thought patterns that you might be having, and actually bringing them back to the present moment and thinking, right, I'm not going to worry about what hasn't happened and what's going to happen. Just sort of enjoying the here and now, and just waiting. And I guess it goes like what Tom was saying, that confirmation bias, going online, seeing like what happens if I get made redundant, and it's kind of you're feeding that. So I guess from a mindfulness perspective, I would say to just acknowledge your wandering thoughts and to just bring them back to the present moment.
Wonderful, Karen. And Julie, in terms of we've got some very different things happening in organisations right now, and we could have some people are in work, some people aren't in work, some people are furloughed, some are not, flexi furlough. How do organisations deal with engagement and happiness of their people when there could be an evolving two-tier workforce happening? Have we had a losing Julie moment?
I'm sorry, I completely lost everything then. Can you repeat that? Sorry, I keep losing connection.
So there's a potential at the moment, but we've got some two-tier workforce situations happening with some people in, some people out, some people working, some people not. How do we engage with workforces that are experiencing things very differently?
I mean, there's going to be that many scenarios for this. I think one of the biggest things could be the conflict between, you've obviously got your office staff, your staff working from home. I think I broke up again.
No, you're with us, it's fine.
Can you still hear me?
We can.
We could.
Okay, so Julie is going to remain paused for a moment. Can one of my other panelists pick that up, the thread, and run with it?
I'm back, sorry. My connection's gone shocking.
Always the way.
So Julie, this is one of those moments that everyone watching is thinking, thank God that happens to other people in front of me, because I have...
Not me. I'm getting right sweaty here. Before I break up again, I was just quickly going to say it's about managing all the communication, the engagement. You're obviously going to have staff feeling that they're picking up everybody else's work. Others are going to be feeling guilty that they're not able to do it. And I think this comes down to, again, the communication, and I think it's going to take a lot of team building. I think there's going to be a lot rising from this, where you're going to have to maybe go back to the basics and get your teams sort of, even just the early days of these building activities, and just sort of coming together again as a team, because I think we've just drifted that far that we need to come back together first as a team to be able to go forward.
Brilliant, thanks Julie. Your signal hung on beautifully for you to deliver that, so well played, well played. So just as have we got any kind of questions coming through our kind of people in the background watching our questions?
Yeah, so one of the questions we've had come in is how do we normalise flexible times? So, for example, Swati describes that he likes to do emails in the evening and nights and be present at home for his family during the day. So how do you sort of like normalise those flexible times?
Tom, do you want to take that one? Wonderful.
Yeah, nice little trick for managers. It's not a trick really. It should be in all organisations. There's a working well plan or a well-being plan. They're typically used after people have had time off to ask questions like, when do you work well? What can I do as your manager to manage down your stresses? Is there anything I need to know about life away from work? That kind of stuff. And there's no particular reason why that shouldn't be used after any period of absence, for example, paternity or maternity, or indeed furlough. And so it basically brings out a conversation between you and your manager to understand what your working life could be like. And it's designed really to empower both people to have a bit of an agreement, understand that if I'm sending an email at 8 o'clock, it's not because I'm overworking, but because I've just like put the kids to bed or something like that. And it just brings out those things, and maybe somebody else who you have caring responsibilities for. And in an ideal world, these conversations are happening anyway, but it is not an ideal world, and sometimes we need to revisit them and sometimes even write them down, just so a manager with lots of people in the team can remember. And so that if you change managers or if you change role, you've got something already there to show the next person. I think one of the correspondents in the box said she's going to go back to a different role and she's feeling quite isolated about it. So that kind of thing can help a bit of stability. That doesn't always mean your manager follows through on this, but that's probably somewhere where you might get a bit of advice from HR. But to have it written down, wellbeing plan, or and if you run that into a search engine, you'll get plenty of variations on it. But you could write your own one up quite easily, just describing when you're going to work at your best, because after all, that's what the organisation wants from you. It's the best, you at your best, and that's what you want to give to them partly. So can be helpful to have that conversation.
Wonderful. And I think you're absolutely, being really upfront about those conversations and saying, this is when I tend to work at my best, and just being open about that. Great. Thanks, Tom. Any other questions that we've got coming through from our audience?
Yeah, so there was one from Ellie. So a question to our panel, how do you feel about toxic positivity?
Wow, nice one. Who wants to take that? Rachel, I think you want
Interestingly,
to take it.
I had a really interesting experience of this, and kind of it really links into something that both Julie and Tom were saying about reconnecting teams and finding ways for people to work asynchronously. One of the things that I've noticed that there are quite a lot of organisations are doing are flooding their people with positive messages and positive. Let's do a quiz, and let's do this, and let's do that, and let's all talk together. Let's all be happy. And actually, I spoke to a lady recently who had some feedback from particularly one of the people on furlough that said, you know what, I don't want to hear from you at the moment. I want to be where I am. I don't want all of this positivity, and it's actually quite tiring. And I think it's the same. I've had quite a few calls where people have said, I looked everywhere to see whether I could see the Zoom link to this, and you haven't sent a Zoom link. And you're like, well, no, because I didn't know whether you wanted me in your house with my face at the moment. So giving people the space to be where they are at the moment, I think is really important. And I think there are technological solutions to doing that. We do still have telephones. Telephones are shocking objects that you can still connect without having that FaceTime and that positive grinning time. You can stare out of the window. You can have your resting face on, whichever resting face that is. And it enables people to get away from that eternal positivity. But equally, in terms of the asynchronous working, I've been using a wonderful system for collaborative working that enables people to contribute when they're ready to contribute. It's still a team, it's still working as a team, but you don't all have to be in each other's faces being positive and happy whilst you're working on it. You can do it in your own time. And I think that's something that we all need to learn to embrace at a team level rather than an organisational level, to give people that space.
100%. I actually had an old-fashioned telephone call myself last week, and I just thought, gosh, I've missed this. The ability to just talk to someone without having to, as you say, be this sort of manic grinning object in front of everybody. But yeah, perfect. So we're kind of coming to the end of our kind of time together today. It would be really useful, bearing in mind, you know, the topic of this webinar was around, you know, whose role is it to kind of manage mental health? And with that in mind, would like from each panelist your 3 things that our audience can take away with how an organisation can manage mental health for people, and how individuals can. So they can all be an individual thing, or they can all be an employer thing, but your top 3 thoughts on the topic would be great. And I don't mind who goes first. Tom's smiling the most, so I'm going to throw that monkey. Yeah, that's your over grinning.
Okay, so first, my first tip is that you're going to have to review your HR policies and procedures, because they're probably out of date now. They probably were already, actually, probably too long, full of legal jargon and not very helpful. But now, you really have to kind of have a look at those. But don't design them yourselves. Get employee input into those, because you need to know the lived experience of your employees in order for you to get the right stuff in terms of supporting them in your policy. So that's 1. 2, leaders, you've got to go first on this. Your ability to share your crap as well as your good stuff is really very helpful. It legitimizes the conversation. It shows other people you can be successful and have difficult days, and lots of other positive things. So leaders, you've got to go first. They're my two top tips.
Wonderful, thanks, Tom. Karen, can I go to you next?
So my tips would be for individuals, what they can do to ensure that they don't risk burnout and keep their well-being intact. But that would be, you know, have a me day, you know, have a higher purpose, get, you know, to finish work, put some discipline in. So I guess that's 1. Be aware of your mood. Your mood can powerfully bias the way you think and feel. So if you're in a bad mood and you suddenly think, I'm useless, I'm never going to get a job, it's probably the mood that's making you think that. So just be aware of your mood and acknowledge that, and I guess just be grateful for, you know, the time and you know, the space that you've got at the moment.
Wonderful, thanks, Karen. Julie.
Okay, well, I've still got some connection. I think for me, it's down to knowing your staff, knowing your team, and I think that is more, there's no one size fits all. So it's about knowing your team and tailoring your approach to people. Can manage things a lot better than others, so it's just knowing everybody's levels. Secondly, I would say, you know, sort of echoing on what Tom said about the HR stuff, I think maybe review your core values, because they're the heart of your workplace culture, and obviously what your values were 12 months ago are probably going to have changed, so that needs to be a big starting point. And including your employees, bring them along for the ride. And I think lastly, again, it's down to the managers to lead on this and take this forward.
Great, thank you, Julie. And lastly, Rachel.
I think the word that comes to mind throughout the conversations that we've had today is listening, and listening to at an individual level, listening to yourself, listening to what your body needs, listening to what your appetite is, listening to what your mood is, and sort of tuning into yourself, but also at an organizational level, listening to your people and creating the psychological safety in your organization that enables people to find that narrative again and to communicate effectively within it. So the first big one has to be listening. The second one is about technology, and I think recognizing that we can all still operate one of these, and one of these, if I can reach for an old school telephone, and go old school. We don't need to use Zoom just because Zoom exists. We work perfectly well before Zoom exists, and we will work perfectly well in the future. But also becoming aware of the new technologies that can work for you. Some of the collaborative technologies that I think can really help teams come back together. And I think for my final one, I go back to my my NLP world, and it's one for self and leaders, which is pace, pace, pace again, and then lead. And I think we have to be with our people and find that space before we can take them forward.
Wonderful, thank you, and thank you so much to our extraordinary panelists today. It's been really lovely to, I mean, that has been an hour that has utterly whizzed by, certainly for me. But is there anything that we need to do in terms of links to a survey or anything for those of you who are hovering in the dark for us?
So you don't need to do anything, but to our audience, when the webinar shuts, you'll automatically be sent to our online survey. If you can take about 5 minutes just to answer it, it will help our panel, and also we can pick up any questions we didn't get to today. So thank you all, and we hope to see you on our next webinar.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
False smiling.